My name is Nadine. I am 33 years old. My husband, Marcus, was 36. We had been married for 7 years, together for 9. Long enough that the architecture of our life together felt permanent, like a house whose foundation you no longer think to check. As a graphic designer, I live in a world of subtle adjustments. The space between letters, known as kerning. Deleting, which is the space between lines of text. The delicate balance of negative space that allows the positive elements to breathe. A millimeter of change can transform a word from cramped and anxious to elegant and clear. I thought our marriage was a masterpiece of composition. I was wrong. I had been so focused on the grand design, the house, the future, the shared surname, that I had stopped noticing the kerning. The space between us had grown distorted, and the message of our love had become utterly illegible. The end didn't begin with a shout. It began with a murmur, a casual erasure spoken over the hum of the refrigerator on a Tuesday night. We were talking about the living room, a space I had designed and furnished almost entirely myself, using money from my freelance design work. The sofa, a deep charcoal sectional from West Elm, was starting to show its age. I was thinking we could replace the sofa, I said, scrolling through a design site on my tablet. I just landed that new tech startup as a client. The deposit alone would cover a really nice piece. Marcus glanced up from his phone, a flicker of something, annoyance maybe, or boredom in his eyes. He didn't look at the tablet. He didn't ask about the client. He just sighed, a soft puff of air that carried an incredible weight of dismissal. We can talk about it, he said, his tone placating as if speaking to a child who wanted a new toy. But we need to use the real income for priorities. I frowned, confused. The deposit is $10,000, Marcus. That's more than enough for a sofa. He finally put his phone down and looked at me. His expression was one of strained patience, the kind a teacher uses for a student who just can't grasp a simple concept. And then he said the words that recalibrated 7 years of marriage into a single stark equation of disrespect. That's your hobby money, Nadine. The real income is mine. He said it so simply. No malice, no anger. He said it like he was stating the color of the sky. An immutable fact. My income, all $68,000 of my salary, plus the $30,000 to $40,000 I averaged in freelance work, was a hobby. A cute little side project that generated play money. His salary as a regional sales manager for a beverage company was the real income, the load-bearing wall of our financial life. My contributions were merely decorative, wallpaper. In that moment, the room felt suddenly and intensely quiet. The hum of the refrigerator sounded like a roar. My work wasn't a hobby. It was a career I had built from nothing. It had paid for the tablet in my hands. It had paid for the sofa we were sitting on. It had paid for the artisanal small batch coffee in his favorite mug. It had paid for the down payment on this very house. Not all of it, but a significant structural portion of it. He knew this. We had sat in the bank and watched my wire transfer hit the escrow account. He had praised my hustle then. But memory, I was learning, is a collaborative project. And Marcus had been quietly editing our shared history for years. He had been photoshopping me out of the picture of our success, one casual comment at a time. This was just the first time I had seen the original file and the edited version side by side. The discrepancy was breathtaking. I didn't say anything. I just nodded, the tablet screen going dark in my lap, reflecting a face I barely recognized. It was the face of a woman who had just been demoted in her own life. The archaeology of disrespect is a quiet science. You don't find a singular, dramatic ruin. You find layers of sediment compressed over years, each one a tiny act of erosion. After his comment about my hobby money, I started digging. I didn't have to dig far. The evidence was everywhere, embedded in the very fabric of our home. Our house in the Grant Park neighborhood of Atlanta was our proudest joint achievement. A 1920s bungalow we'd bought and lovingly restored, or rather, a bungalow I had lovingly restored. Marcus loved the idea of it, the prestige of owning a home with character. He was less involved in the infrastructure. When the time came for the down payment, his savings were lighter than he'd projected. A market dip, he called it. I, on the other hand, had just completed a massive rebranding project for a local restaurant group. The payment had been substantial. My freelance account, the one he now called my hobby fund, held nearly $40,000. We needed 60. 20 of that 40 went directly to the down payment. I remember the day of the closing. He put his arm around me, beaming, and told the real estate agent, Nadine's little design business really came in handy. He said it like I'd found a winning lottery ticket on the street, a stroke of luck. Not like I'd worked 60-hour weeks for 3 months, managing a demanding client and a complex project to earn it. Even then, the phrasing bothered me, came in handy, like a spare key or a book of matches. A convenience, not a contribution. But I'd smiled because we were buying our first house, and I refused to let a clumsy phrase ruin the moment. I mistook his poor wording for a lack of vocabulary, not a lack of respect. The house was an empty shell, and we had nothing to put in it. My salary covered our day-to-day bills, utilities, groceries, insurance. His went toward the mortgage and his car payment. That was the agreement. The joint account was for the big things. But furnishing a house is a series of big things. Don't worry, I've got this, I'd said, full of the foolish optimism of a new homeowner. And I did. The charcoal West Elm sectional he loved to lounge on while watching football, that was from the redesign of a boutique hotel's website. I remember working on the wireframes late into the night, my eyes burning, thinking about how we'd curl up on that sofa together. The solid oak dining table from Crate and Barrel where he hosted poker nights with his friends, that came from a series of packaging designs I did for a natural skincare line. He would brag to his friends about the table's craftsmanship, the beautiful grain of the wood. We got a great deal on it, he'd say. The we, a convenient fiction that absorbed my labor into his narrative of smart consumerism. He never once said, Nadine bought this table with the money she earned designing a face cream box. He'd say, we need to be careful this month. The house is eating up all our money. The hour was doing so much work in that sentence. It was a blanket he threw over a financial reality that was far more complex. My money wasn't ours. It was a magic, replenishing fund that appeared whenever a gap needed filling. The erosion was gradual. At first, he was appreciative. Babe, you're a lifesaver, he'd say, when I'd offer to pick up a big grocery bill or a dinner check because things were tight for him. But over time, appreciation curdled into expectation. Lifesaver became my job description. The gaps became wider. His car was a perfect example, a sleek, black Audi A6 that cost more than my first 2 years of post-college salary combined. It was his pride and joy. 2 years into our marriage, he was laid off from a previous job. It was a brutal time for him, and I did everything I could to be the supportive wife. I buffered his ego. I managed the household so he could focus on his job search, and I took over his $600 monthly car payment. Just until I get back on my feet, he promised. He was back on his feet in 4 months, landing a better job with a higher salary. But I kept paying the car note. When I brought it up the first time, he looked wounded. Is it a problem? Things are still a little shaky. I'm trying to rebuild my savings. How could I say yes? How could I be the wife who added financial pressure to a man already beaten down? So I said nothing. A year later, I brought it up again. This time, his response was different. It was tinged with irritation. Nadine, it just comes out of the account. It's all our money. What's the big deal? It wasn't all our money. It was my money from my paycheck being directly deposited into our joint account from which the automatic payment was drawn. His paycheck went to his personal account, and he would transfer his half of the mortgage into the joint account. Over time, the amount he transferred became less precise. The joint account, which was supposed to be our shared financial hub, slowly transformed. It became the account where my entire salary landed and from which all our shared life was paid for. The mortgage payment, his half often arriving late, the utilities, the groceries, the property taxes, the home repairs, and his car payment. My hobby money was the engine room of our entire life, and he was living on the sunny upper deck, convinced the ship was sailing on his steam alone. This financial sleight of hand was subtle, executed over years. If you looked at any single month, it might seem like a simple oversight, an ebb and flow between partners. But when I started looking at the entire 7-year timeline, the pattern was undeniable. It was a meticulous, slow motion transfer of financial responsibility from him to me, conducted under the guise of marital unity. He had outsourced his financial burdens to me and called it partnership. The most painful part of this excavation was revisiting memories that I had cherished. Contaminated memories. There was our 5th anniversary trip to Savannah. We stayed in a beautiful historic inn, eaten at incredible restaurants, and walked for hours under the Spanish moss. He'd been so romantic, so present. He'd raised a glass at dinner one night and toasted to us, to building a beautiful life together. I had cried, my heart full. Now, looking back at my bank statements from that month, I saw the truth. The trip coincided with the final payment I received for designing a national ad campaign for a coffee brand. The entire trip, the hotel, the meals, the gas to get there had been paid for out of my account. When he'd said, building a beautiful life together, what he'd meant was that he was the architect and I was the unlimited construction budget. He was curating the experiences and my labor was the silent, uncredited resource that made it all possible. The memory was now tainted, like a beautiful photograph with a chemical stain spreading from the corner. The joy of it was gone, replaced by the cold, metallic taste of a transaction I hadn't known I was making. I had to confront my own complicity in this. I had allowed it. I was a designer, a person who creates systems of logic and beauty. My entire career was based on arranging elements into a harmonious, functional whole. I had applied the same principle to my marriage. I had smoothed over the awkward gaps in our finances, filled the empty spaces with my own resources, and called it harmony. I didn't want to count pennies. I didn't want to be the kind of wife who kept a running tally of who paid for what. That felt transactional, not romantic. I wanted us to be a single, seamless entity. But in my quest for a perfect composition, I had allowed a fundamental imbalance. I had given him the power to define the terms of our success. I had let him frame my career as a little business and my income as extra. I had accepted the role of the supporting character in the story of our life because the story was easier to tell that way. It was a story of a successful man providing for his family with a creative, supportive wife by his side. It was a story that fit neatly into societal expectations. The truth that the creative wife was co-financing the entire production and in some months was the sole executive producer was a messier, more complicated script. And so, for 7 years, I had quietly edited our reality to match his preferred narrative. I had been his silent co-conspirator in my own erasure. The comment about my hobby money wasn't an attack. It was a final report, the summary of a project he had been working on for years, the project of diminishing me. And the most terrifying part was that he had been so successful, he didn't even know he was doing it anymore. He believed it. He truly, genuinely believed that his income was real and mine was a cute, monetized pastime. The kerning was no longer just off. The letters were starting to dissolve entirely. The breaking point, when it came, was not an earthquake, but a single, silent keystroke. It happened while Marcus was away on a week-long sales conference in Las Vegas. His texts were sporadic, filled with pictures of convention halls and group dinners with colleagues. He seemed happy, expansive, enjoying the rhythm of his real income work. Back home in Atlanta, I was managing the quiet machinery of our life. A notice had arrived for our semi-annual property tax, a bill we always paid out of the joint account. It was due at the end of the week. On a Wednesday evening, with a cup of chamomile tea beside me, I sat down at my desk. a beautiful walnut piece I'd bought after a particularly successful quarter of freelance work, and logged into our joint bank account. I expected to see the usual balance, a healthy cushion of a few $1,000s from my last paycheck, plus whatever Marcus had transferred for his half of the mortgage. The page loaded. I blinked. I thought there was a glitch. The balance read $24.17. My heart didn't race. It didn't pound. It just seemed to stop. A profound, hollow stillness spread through my chest. As a designer, I understood the power of white space. It's the emptiness that gives the other elements shape and meaning. In that moment, my entire life felt like white space. All the substance had been carved out, leaving only a terrifying, silent void. I clicked on the transaction history, my hand steady. My mind was preternaturally calm, analytical, as if I were debugging a piece of code. And there it was, a single transaction from 2 days prior, a transfer, out. The amount was $9,400. The destination, Marcus's personal checking account. The memo line was blank. He had drained our entire shared financial life. The money for the property tax, the money for the utilities, the money for the groceries I was planning to buy tomorrow, the money from my salary, the money from my freelance work, $9,400 gone. He had left just enough to prevent an overdraft fee. It was a calculated, precise extraction. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the numbers on the screen. The stillness inside me wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. Not yet. It was clarity. It was the moment in the design process when you've been struggling with the concept for weeks, moving elements around, trying different fonts, different colors, and nothing works. And then, in a flash of insight, you realize the problem isn't the elements. It's the entire framework. You don't need to adjust. You need to delete the file and start over. I was looking at a corrupted file. 7 years of meticulous layering, careful composition, and collaborative effort had been flattened into a single, ugly, unusable image. The work was unsalvageable. As this profound, chilling realization settled into my bones, my phone buzzed on the desk beside me. A notification lit up the screen. It was from Venmo. Marcus Stone sent you $12. My finger moved on its own, tapping to open the app. Underneath the payment, in the little memo line where people usually put pizza emojis or inside jokes, he had written 2 words. Your half. He had taken the remaining $24.17 and he had split it. He had sent me $12. He had kept the other $12.17 for himself. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a clumsy attempt at managing finances. This was a statement. This was a punchline. He had liquidated our shared assets and sent me a pittance, a joke, a final, itemized invoice for my worth in our partnership. $12, the cost of a mediocre sandwich. That was the end. That was the sound of the foundation cracking from corner to corner. The house was coming down. The hobby, it turned out, was my marriage. And I was done playing. The Venmo notification, that cheerful blue and white screen, was the ugliest thing I had ever seen. It was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive design, a perfectly kerned insult. He had taken my money, my security, my past and future contributions, and called it his. Then he had tossed me the digital equivalent of pocket change and called it fair. He thought he was closing a ledger. He had no idea he was giving me a blueprint for my own liberation. In the aftermath of the $12 Venmo, a strange calm descended. The panic I should have felt was absent, replaced by a cold, diamond-hard precision. Grief would come later. For now, there was only work to be done. My mind, so accustomed to project management and design workflows, kicked into a gear I didn't know it had. I was no longer a wife processing betrayal. I was a designer executing a rebrand of her own life. The objective was simple: complete and total extraction. The first step was containment. I opened a new browser tab and in less than 10 minutes opened a new online checking and savings account with a different bank. It was an account with one name on it, Nadine Wallace. My name, the name I was born with, the name that had signed my first design contract. It felt solid, a piece of clean typography in a world of cluttered noise. Next, I logged into the payroll portal for my full-time job. I rerouted my direct deposit to the new account. The change would be effective by the next pay cycle, which was Friday. Today was Wednesday. Perfect. Then I logged into my freelance payment systems, Stripe, PayPal, QuickBooks, and did the same, updating my banking information for all outstanding and future invoices. I built a new financial architecture in under an hour, a fortress with walls he couldn't breach. He was due back from Las Vegas on Sunday afternoon. That gave me 4 days. I didn't start packing in a frenzy. My movements were deliberate, methodical, as if I were curating a museum exhibit titled The Life and Work of Nadine Wallace. I walked through our home, the bungalow I had poured so much of myself into, and I made a mental inventory. The lens was simple. What had my hobby money paid for? I started in the living room, the charcoal sectional. I couldn't take it, but I took the beautiful hand-woven throw pillows I'd bought from a local artist. I took the art from the walls, 3 large abstract prints that I'd chosen and framed myself. The wall behind them looked shockingly bare, pockmarked with nail holes. Good. Let the absence speak for itself. I took the vintage record player and the collection of jazz vinyl I had spent years building. He had never once used it. In the kitchen, I packed the set of German steel knives I bought myself as a celebration for landing a big client. I packed the Le Creuset Dutch oven he'd never touched, but that I used every week. I packed my collection of cookbooks, their spines a colorful testament to 1,000 meals I had planned and cooked. I left him the mismatched plates and the cheap silverware we'd gotten as a wedding gift. My office was the easiest. It was my sanctuary, a space funded entirely by my own success. I disconnected my iMac, my drawing tablet, my professional grade printer. I carefully boxed up my library of design books, their pages full of inspiration and knowledge that belonged only to me. As I dismantled the room, it transformed from a vibrant creative studio into a sad, empty box with a desk in it. The hardest part was the bedroom, our shared space. But even here, the division was clear. I packed my clothes, my shoes, my jewelry. I stripped the bed of the expensive linen sheets I had splurged on. I left his side of the closet untouched, a shrine to a man I no longer knew. With each box I packed, I felt lighter. I was stripping away the layers of compromise, of erasure, of quiet resentment. I was excavating myself from the ruins of our marriage. I hired a moving service for Saturday morning, a small local company that asked no questions. They were efficient, professional, and in 2 hours, the tangible evidence of my 7-year contribution to that household was loaded into a truck. My last act in that house was one of pure, crystalline clarity. I went to my now empty office, plugged my printer in one last time, and opened the Venmo app on my phone. I took a screenshot of the transaction. Marcus Stone sent you $12. Your half. I sent it to my computer and opened it in Photoshop. I didn't edit it. I didn't add a single word. I just resized it to fill an entire 8.5 by 11-inch page and printed it in high-resolution color. The cheerful blue banner looked obscene on the crisp white paper. I walked into the kitchen. The granite countertops, which I had picked out and paid the upgrade fee for, gleamed under the track lighting. I placed a single sheet of paper in the exact center of the island. It was the only object in the pristine, empty space. It was a note. It was a receipt. It was a declaration of war fought with the quiet weapon of accounting. It was the most powerful piece of design I had ever created. It needed no explanation. It was perfectly, brutally clear. I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I locked the door with my key for the last time. I walked to the mailbox at the curb, opened the little metal slot, and dropped the key inside. The clink it made as it hit the bottom was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a file being closed, a project completed. I got in my car, which was fully paid off thanks to 3 years of disciplined saving, and drove away. I didn't know exactly where I was going yet, but for the first time in a very long time, I knew I was driving toward a life that was designed by me, for me. The temperature inside the car was cool, the air precise. I was done calculating. I was simply done. The first text arrived Sunday at 4:17 p.m., presumably moments after he walked through the door. Just landed. On my way home. Can't wait to see you. An hour later at 5:22 p.m., what the hell? Where is everything? Followed immediately by, where are you? Nadine, answer your phone. I was in a hotel room I'd booked for a few nights, surrounded by boxes that contained the curated artifacts of my real life. I watched the messages flood in, my phone buzzing on the nightstand like a trapped insect. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were watching a movie. The calls started next, one after another. Marcus, Marcus, Marcus. I let each one go to voicemail. I knew what he would find. An empty house stripped of its warmth and character, a hollowed out life, and a single sheet of paper on the kitchen island. After the 10th missed call, his tone shifted from confusion to anger. The text became accusations. This is insane. You've lost your mind. What kind of dramatic stunt is this? You emptied our house? After everything I do for us, you pulled this? Unbelievable. The phrase, everything I do for us, almost made me laugh. It was the thesis statement of his entire delusion. He genuinely believed he was the sole provider, the benefactor, the one holding it all together. He was standing in the wreckage of a home that my income had built and furnished and was still convinced he was the victim. I let him spiral for another hour. I ordered room service. I took a long, hot shower. I put on clean pajamas and sat on the bed, feeling the quiet hum of the hotel's air conditioning. It was the sound of peace. Finally, I decided to answer. I needed to hear his voice just to confirm that the man I thought I knew was truly gone, replaced by this stranger. Nadine, for God's sake, what is going on? He practically screamed into the phone. There was panic in his voice, the high-pitched terror of a man whose comfort has been catastrophically disrupted. I kept my own voice low and even. What do you think is going on, Marcus? I think you've gone crazy. The house is empty. You took everything. I didn't take everything, I corrected him, my tone as placid as a still lake. I took what I paid for. There was a pause. I could hear him breathing, the sound ragged. He was processing. The gears were turning, trying to reconcile my statement with his long-held narrative of financial superiority. What are you talking about? We bought that stuff together. It's our stuff. Is it? I asked. A simple, clarifying question. He floundered, his anger giving way to a desperate, blustering defense. This is about that sofa comment, isn't it? You're blowing this completely out of proportion. It was a joke. The Venmo was a joke too? Silence. A thick, damning silence. He had no answer for that. The screenshot on the counter was an undeniable fact. It was evidence. He tried a different tactic, his voice softening into a grotesque parody of concern. Look, honey, maybe I was a little clumsy. I've been under a lot of stress. I didn't mean it like it sounded. I was just trying to manage our finances, get things organized. He was trying to reframe his theft as an act of responsible stewardship. He was trying to rebrand the narrative in real time. And then he delivered the line that cemented my decision as the single most correct choice I had ever made in my life. The line that was supposed to be an explanation, an olive branch, but was instead the purest distillation of his entitlement I had ever heard. I was managing our finances. You should be thanking me. I had to close my eyes. Thank him. He had emptied our joint account, stolen $9,400 of what was largely my money, sent me a $12 insult, and he expected gratitude. He saw his actions not as a betrayal, but as a service for which he should be praised. He wasn't just the protagonist of his own story. He was the hero, and I was the ungrateful, hysterical side character. I took a deep breath. There would be no argument. There would be no screaming match. Arguing with him was like trying to critique the typography on a billboard from a speeding car. Pointless. He would never see it. So I responded with a simple, unchallengeable fact. A mic drop of quiet administrative power. The deed to the house has 2 names on it, I said calmly. My new bank account only has 1. I heard a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. And then I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked his mother, his sister, his best friend. I erected a digital firewall around my new, quiet life. The escalation would continue, I knew. There would be emails, attempts to contact me through work, maybe even a visit to my parents. But the direct line was cut. The power he had to disrupt my peace with the buzz of a phone was gone. The performance was over. Rebuilding is a quieter process than demolition. My new life started in a 600 square foot studio apartment in Midtown. It wasn't a sprawling bungalow, but it was a space I chose alone for myself. The light was fantastic, pouring in through a huge industrial window that overlooked the city. Every single thing inside it was mine, either brought from the old life or purchased with money I earned. There was no shared history to untangle, no contaminated memories embedded in the furniture. It was a blank canvas. For the first time in years, I designed for myself. I painted the walls a soft, calming gray. I bought a small, elegant navy blue sofa. I hung my art. I created a workspace that was efficient and beautiful. The apartment became my personal project, and I poured all the creative energy I had been wasting on maintaining a failing marriage into creating a sanctuary for myself. Something remarkable happened when I removed the psychic weight of Marcus's dismissiveness. My work exploded, freed from the constant low-grade humiliation of my career being called a hobby. My confidence soared. I pitched bigger clients. I took on more ambitious projects. My designs became bolder, more assured. It was as if I had been trying to create masterpieces using only shades of gray, and suddenly someone had handed me a full-color palette. Within 6 months, my freelance income had not just doubled, it had tripled. I was making more from my hobby than I was from my full-time job. I was making more from my hobby than Marcus made from his real income. The irony was not lost on me, but it didn't bring me a sense of triumphant revenge. It brought me a sense of profound, quiet validation. My value was never in question. I had just been living with someone who was incapable of seeing it. I found joy in small, solitary moments, buying expensive, wonderful paper for a new print project without having to justify the cost, drinking coffee in the morning sun that streamed through my window with no one there to interrupt my thoughts, walking through Piedmont Park on a Saturday, not because we had to maintain a social calendar, but simply because I wanted to. I was discovering the texture of my own desires, unblended with anyone else's. The divorce was surprisingly straightforward. He tried to fight for the house, claiming he'd paid the mortgage. My lawyer simply presented the bank statements from our joint account for the past 7 years, a clear, undeniable narrative of my salary covering the majority of our household expenses, including his car. The numbers didn't lie. In the end, we sold the house and split the equity. My half was more than enough to set up a robust business account and a healthy emergency fund. I was my own safety net now. The final encounter happened at the lawyer's office to sign the last of the paperwork. I hadn't seen him in person in almost a year. I was braced for it to be difficult, for a wave of old anger or grief to wash over me. But when he walked in, I felt nothing. He looked diminished, smaller. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by a kind of weary slump in his shoulders. He had lost weight. He avoided my eyes. We sat across a large mahogany table, the space between us filled with stacks of paper. As we signed document after document, he tried to make small talk. "Heard your business is doing well," he said, his voice quiet, almost shy. I didn't look up from the page I was signing. "I'm happy," I said. It was the simplest, most honest thing I could say. It wasn't a boast. It was a statement of fact. He nodded, a jerky, awkward movement. "That's good. I'm glad." I glanced at him then. For the first time, I didn't see a villain. I saw a man who had built his identity on a fragile foundation of perceived superiority, and the ground had given out beneath him. His tragedy wasn't his cruelty, but his profound mediocrity. He had to believe my contributions were small, because acknowledging their true scale would have forced him to see his own as ordinary. His ego couldn't survive it. I felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant clinical sadness for him. He had lost so much more than a wife. He had lost his curated reality. We finished signing. I stood up, shook my lawyer's hand, and walked out of the conference room without a backward glance. There were no final words, no dramatic confrontation. There was no need. The work was done. For years, I believed that love was an act of unconditional contribution. You give what is needed, you fill the gaps, you smooth the rough edges, you don't keep score. A home, I thought, was a collaborative design, and the goal was a beautiful, seamless final product. But a partnership without honest accounting isn't a romance. It's an exploitation. You can't build something true on a lie, no matter how beautifully you decorate it. He called my income hobby money. A hobby is something you do for love without an expectation of return. And I realized with the clarity that was both heartbreaking and liberating that I had been treating our marriage like my hobby. I poured my time, my talent, my labor, and my love into it, asking for nothing in return but the joy of the project itself. He, meanwhile, was treating it like a business in which he was the CEO, and I was an unpaid, uncredited intern. The problem was never the money, it was the value. He had spent years devaluing my contribution so he could overvalue his own. The $12 Venmo wasn't just an insult, it was his final, honest valuation of my role in his life. And the greatest gift he ever gave me was making that valuation so clear I could no longer ignore it. You can't design a life with someone who is constantly erasing your work. You can't build a future on a foundation of invisible labor. Sometimes the only way to see your own worth is to step away from the collaboration and create something that is entirely, unapologetically your own. My life is no longer a collaboration. It is a signed original work. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.